All right, good afternoon, everyone. I see a couple familiar names back to my admission counseling days. For those that I have not met before, my name is Ziggy Blackwell, Director of Recruitment for the Golden Apple Scholars Program. Prior to joining Golden Apple, I spent a little over 10 years in college admission counseling. So that is why I see a few familiar names and glad you can join. I will take questions at the end of the presentation, but you are more than welcome to drop your questions into the chat feature. And that way we can maybe get a head start. When I do take questions, I can have a head start on answering some of those questions. If you are not familiar with Golden Apple Scholars, I do want to introduce our mission before I share my screen. But we are a tuition assistance. First of all, we are a teacher preparation program. So we are a teacher preparation program that provides tuition assistance to students who are interested in going into teaching for Illinois schools of need. So although I will be talking about how we support transfer students through our program, I want you to also keep that in mind. It's through the lens of a student who is thinking about teaching in the state of Illinois. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen. So you'll notice that some of the concepts I'll share and some of the best practices that I'll share is connected to university and college admission recruitment. That's intentional. So as I share our recruitment team, I'll let you know in terms of how we support your students throughout the state of Illinois. Of course, the strategies and anything that you need can certainly start with me. But we also do a territory recruitment model. So as you look at the rest of the recruitment team, Norma De La Rosa supports transfer students in the Chicagoland area and in the city of Chicago. So if you are working with transfer students in the Chicago and surrounding suburbs, as far west as Kane County, or as far north as Lake and McKendree, or as far south as Will County, Norma De La Rosa can support you in presentations or working directly with your students and applicants. As you venture out of the Chicagoland area into the central, western, and southern region of Illinois, Rocio Manriquez will support you. Now, all of us are available to you at any point, but at least you know who your contact is should you want us to come out and do a presentation for you. Or if you would just like to, let us know about a student that you're recommending to the program, you can use your territory manager. Now, as I mentioned, we are a teacher preparation program providing tuition assistance for aspiring teachers. Now, there's 3 pathways into our program. We can certainly accept students as high school seniors, but for the purpose of this presentation, we can also accept students as freshmen or sophomore students, whether they be at a 4-year university or at a community college. And what I can also share is we do prioritize freshman and sophomore college students in our selection process, because what we do know is that in many cases, high school seniors, when the minute that they start college, there might be an exploration period where a high school senior can, for several years, have thought that teaching is what they wanted to do. And the minute they start first-year courses, maybe that mindset shifts, and then that student may decide to switch majors and then no longer wants to become a teacher. And instead, what we do know is that if we're working with a freshman or a college student, and that student has already shown demonstrated interest in education and teaching, in many cases, that transfer student or that college student is pretty locked in. They've already started courses that gives them an introduction to that career. And so when we're making our selections, we tend to notice that freshman and sophomore students continue with our program commitment and graduate from our program higher than high school seniors. Our goal again also is to make sure that our scholars stay in the state of Illinois. So once they graduate from a four-year university, they do have to commit to teach in an Illinois School of Need for 5 years. And later on, I'll talk to you a little bit about how we can support students in finding that right school to teach in. Now, before I mention this slide, going back to my college admission days, one of the things I often noticed is when you're working with transfer students and you're thinking about what type of support services are commonly looked upon by transfer students, is in many cases they're looking for financial assistance. Whether it's a student transferring from a 2-year to a 4-year, or a student transferring from a 4-year to another 4-year. In many cases, I've seen that the transfer scholarships are not as high as a first-year freshman. And so the financial gap may be a little bit higher for a transfer student as they're trying to make that, semester or that yearly balance every single year. So when you think about how a transfer student can be supported through our program, as long as they're thinking about teaching, our tuition assistance can help limit and lower that financial gap for a transfer student. As I explain how we disperse our tuition assistance, just know that a student can earn up to $23,000 in total financial assistance through their time in the program. Now, some of that amount is directly allocated towards tuition assistance. And we actually work with 48 universities in the state of Illinois. So we have 48 university partners that our scholars can attend. And as we're thinking about fit, when you're thinking about those 48 institutions, our partners include institutions as large as University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. They're as small as an Illinois college. They can be as far north as a Lake Forest College, or as far south as a SIU Carbondale, as selective as a Northwestern. So when you're thinking about, what is the best fit for my transfer student, I do want to assure you that our 48 universities can meet that need. But we work with all 48 universities when we're allocating this tuition assistance. And what that means is the transfer student doesn't really have to do anything. We just verify that that student is enrolled at that 4-year institution in good academic standing, and we work directly with the financial aid office and the College of Education to disperse that amount every single semester or every single quarter, depending on the academic calendar. Now, here is where I want to be very clear, because sometimes this is the most misinterpreted part of the tuition assistance that's allocated. A freshman or a sophomore standing student, determined by the institution, by the way, will earn up to $2,500 per year in tuition assistance. And so if it's an academic calendar that's a fall and a semester, then this $2,500 is divided into 2 equal amounts. Once the student is a junior or a senior, the amount goes up to $5,000 per year. Same disbursement process. Is divided up into 2 equal amounts, fall semester or spring semester. But also over the summer, we have an additional amount a student can earn. Over the summer, all of our scholars are required to attend what's called Scholar Institute, or sometimes referred to as Summer Institute. It's about a 3 to 4 week summer camp where a scholar is gaining direct classroom teaching experience. And for their time in the program, we will give them a $2,000 stipend. So here's the big difference. This amount over here, this $2,500 and this $5,000, that goes directly to the institution, and it is added to their financial account. This amount here goes directly into these students' banking account, directly deposited, and they can use that money for whatever they would like. As they're spending their time through the summer teaching camp, the Scholar Institute, we cover the cost of their room and board, and we cover the cost of their meal plan, because we do host these programs at our university partners throughout the state of Illinois.
So as we're thinking about number one, how are we supporting transfer students? Number one, I feel that we can support not feel that we can, I do know that we support transfer students through financial assistance, lowering the financial gap. Now, this slide is a really good visual in terms of the amount of time that we are supporting a student in our program. As I mentioned, that we can accept a freshman or a sophomore standing student, but now let's move into this undergraduate experience. We will support a student for as long as they are an undergrad. So it could be all 4 years, or if a student is on a 6-year plan, we will still support that student. So secondly, as I go back to my college admission days, one of the things I also noticed is that transfer students also could benefit from the social and student involvement support. As I think about transfer students that I've engaged with when I'm back in my college admission days, the orientations could be a little bit different from a freshman, first year freshman student, where maybe that transfer student doesn't have the same amount of student engagement as a first year freshman. Maybe the orientation is only one day compared to an entire week that a first year freshman will receive. Or oftentimes, maybe you have a transfer student that is a commuter student, and maybe there's the habit of the transfer student taking classes and then maybe going to a part-time job, or maybe just going right back home, and maybe doesn't stay in the student center or get involved in many clubs. So how do we make sure that transfer student is socially engaged on campus early on? And that's another area where I feel that we can support transfer students, because throughout their undergraduate experience, we are supporting our scholars through academic and social emotional support. And so what that means is, when you think about our 48 university partners, at every single institution, we have an institution liaison. Typically, it's a professor or an advisor in the School of Education. And that is our direct contact to make sure that our scholars are supported inside and outside the classroom. As I think about, as we're trying to get through this pandemic, students are still adjusting to the hybrid learning, back to in-person, maybe back to virtual learning for a couple of weeks, and also trying to think about what's going on at home. And so through our contacts at the university partners and our staff at Golden Apple, we're making sure that not only our freshman and sophomore scholars are supported, but also our junior and senior scholars are supported. We also have affinity groups. As we think about how do we connect our and I'm going to stop saying transfer students, because in our program, we actually define a freshman, we actually define our sophomore and upper level scholars as pathways. So I'm going to start using the term pathways, because as you're thinking about transfer students, we define those students as pathways. So want to make sure that that terminology starts to sound familiar. But we also have these support groups called affinity groups. And as we think about how we supporting our pathway scholars on campus, our affinity groups helps to connect our pathway scholars to scholars at all university campuses based on self-identities. So if it's a pathway scholar that wants to find out how can I connect with other Black African-American scholars at other universities, how can I do that? Our affinity groups can help create that community. So if you find that maybe we only have, maybe it's a university where we only have a small number of scholars on that university campus, how do we make sure our scholars find a greater community? We can do that through our affinity groups to make sure our scholars find a larger community on their campus and at other university partners. The other thing is we also have peer mentorship. We will assign our other early scholars to peer mentorship, and that's where we are connecting some of our newly inducted scholars to scholars who have been in the program for several years, and
they can provide that support in terms of finding support services at our university campuses, making sure that they're taking classes at the right sequence, but also just making sure that they feel supported based on a common interest of teaching. As I mentioned, all of our scholars come together over the summer and participate through the Scholar Institute program, where they're gaining direct classroom experience. And that gets me to the third part of where I commonly see transfer students looking for that support. Number one, financial support. Second, the social and student involvement support. But third, the career experience. You know, a transfer student, you know, when they step foot at that university, they pretty much have a good idea what they want to study. And it's all about making sure that the plan is laid out to know what classes am I going to take at what time, and how can I get early experience in my career path, because I already know what I want to do. So if it's a student thinking about teaching and it's a transfer student, this Scholar Institute can really get to that student's ability to gain direct early experience in teaching in their first summer in the program. I also want to mention that we rotate these scholars throughout the state of Illinois. So as a pathway, or any scholars are going through the program from year to year, we rotate these experiences to make sure that our students are gaining teaching experiences in rural schools, urban schools, and suburban schools. So if you are supporting a transfer student and you maybe see that that transfer student is thinking about going to a university in a rural area, but maybe has aspirations to teach in an urban metropolitan city, our Scholar Institutes will make sure that they get that teaching experience at some point before they finish our program. Transitioning into the job placement support. Now, at this point, I know that any university, a four-year institution, has a career service department where that transfer student can gain valuable experience and valuable networking experience to prepare them for their eventual career. But we also have that same type of support, whereas we can maybe take it another level and open up another door, where our job placement support can allow us to do things like work with superintendents and principals through our network to make sure that that scholar can do a mock interview and is prepared for that eventual interview that they might go into a year or 2 years from now. We also have partnerships with school districts across the state of Illinois. So if the university maybe finds it difficult to place that graduating student into a right fit school district, if there's any difficulty, well, that scholar can also rely on our network. So we have partnerships as large as Chicago Public Schools. We also have partnerships, in the Decatur area, the western area of Illinois, and the Rock Island and Galesburg area, as far north as the North Chicago area. So we make sure that our district partnerships are throughout the state of Illinois, which could help that student eventually with a job. I do want to also share that 97% of our scholars find a teaching position within 90 days of graduation. So I'll repeat that. 97% of our scholars find a teaching position within 90 days of graduation. So again, if it's the transfer student wondering, okay, I'm only going to be 2 years at this institution. How do I know that, I'll have some job opportunities in 2 years, whereas maybe I didn't spend 4 years networking? We can help support that. And then as that student is graduating in their first 2 to 3 years of teaching, again, I don't see this any different from a job, where the first couple months, maybe even the first couple years, may be a challenging experience, even through the best training. Sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And, it just comes with direct experience in the job, in the school. So we're also going to make sure that all of our scholars, upon graduation, in their first 2 to 3 years of teaching, they will be assigned a mentor, who is typically an award-winning teacher, who will make sure that that scholar is properly supported inside their building and even outside the building to fulfill their 5 years of teaching. Also, our scholars can teach in any county in the state of Illinois. It just has to be in a school of need. So even though we require our scholars to teach in an Illinois School of Need for 5 years, I do assure you that there's over 3,000 Illinois schools of need in the state of Illinois, and there's one in every single county. So if you are coaching and guiding and advising a transfer student, and that transfer student aspires to go back to their community and teach, go back to a former high school, former school to teach, you can assure them that if they want to become a Golden Apple Scholar, that they should have that ability, because there's a school of need in every single county in the state of Illinois. And once they complete their 5 years of teaching, that's when they go through our Crystal Apple ceremony. So one thing I just want to share with you is that, you know, even though it could be a student right out of high school, and maybe we can support that student for nearly a decade, even if it's, you know, a transfer student, again, there's several years of support that we will be with your transfer student. In the interest of time, I'm actually going to skip this video. But again, our Scholar Institutes are really, again, that's the opportunity for our scholars to gain inside the classroom experience, working on classroom management, cultural competency, trauma-informed care, any of those concepts that maybe are shared at the university level, but maybe not shared at the university level. We're providing that additional foundational support.
Each summer, Golden Apple Scholars.
Here, for this slide, what I really want you to see is, I hope that top banner is not shading some of the title, but if it is, what I really want you to see in this slide is the ecosystem that we're trying to create, or not trying to create, that we are creating with our scholars. Again, the recruitment stage starts out as a high school senior or a freshman or sophomore standing college student. Upon acceptance into the program, every single summer, that scholar will participate in our Scholar Institutes and be paid for that participation. They'll also receive the undergraduate social academic support. Again, that's through our connections with university liaisons at all of our 48 university partners, the affinity groups I talked about earlier, the peer mentorship. Again, that's what they're getting throughout their entire years of undergrad. Upon graduation, again, we will support students if they need placement assistance and looking for a right fit district. We'll assign them a mentor. What I want you to think about here is, it's not a surprise when you may meet a student, whether it's a transfer student or whether it's a student in high school, and they come to you and say, I'm interested in teaching. It's no surprise when you unpack that a little bit more that maybe they aspire to go back to their community and teach. And so it's our intention, again, with our district partnerships and our networks with superintendents and principals throughout the state of Illinois, that we always try to make that happen, that they go through our program, graduate, and then we return them right back to their community to teach. That's our full intention, and that's why we're expanding our partnerships with districts across the state of Illinois. What do we look for? This, again, if there's any transfer counselor in the room, whether it be at a 2-year or 4-year, this may look very similar to what you do and how you evaluate a transfer candidate. We do a holistic application review process. We do not have minimum academic requirements, and we're also test score optional. So when you're thinking about what does a fit scholar look like in our program, I did mention that transfer students, often referred to as pathways in our program, do receive priority consideration because they tend to retain at a higher level than a high school's graduating senior. But the academic record is always most important. We're looking at the cumulative GPA, the grade trending, and the course rigor. And so if it's a transfer student, I am not evaluating their high school record. I'm only concerned about the transfer. I'm only concerned about the transcript at the college level. But I'm also evaluating, when I mean course rigor, this may look a little different for transfer students, where I'm not, of course, looking at AP scores or dual credit or anything like that. Instead, I'm really looking at courses that connect to education and teaching, and how has that student performed in those courses. Grade trending continues to be the same. I'm always looking at how that student has performed from their freshman year in college to the time that we get their transcript. Test scores are optional, or we can super score. SAT or ACT scores are accepted. And I do want to share, because oftentimes the question is, if my student applies test score optional, are they given the same level of consideration as someone who submits a score? And I do want to share that of the 300 students that we accepted last year, the vast majority were accepted without a test score, which I don't see that changing this year. And by the way, we're looking for about 400 scholars this year. That is the goal for our acceptance. Next, outside of the academic record, I'm looking at the student activities and employment. But I'm also trying to connect that, or see any connections to teaching. Leadership, volunteerism, or any involvement connected to teaching is what I'm looking for in that resume section of the application. I'm also looking for employment. So again, when thinking about transfer students, I understand that a transfer student may have a part-time or even a full-time job in some cases. I want to see that because that lets me know that that's where the time is going outside the classroom to a job, part-time or full-time. Personal statements are very important because I have to see and I have to feel confident that there's a strong demonstrated interest in teaching. So we do have 5 personal statements. I do stress personal statements. I'm really only looking for about a 3 to 5 sentence statement, but I want to make sure that I feel confident that there's a strong interest in teaching. Or there might be something that a student is concerned about and feels as though this may hold me back from being accepted into the program. And as we all know, personal statements are one of the only areas in an application where that student can tell their story. We do read those personal statements, and they are very important in our selection process. And lastly, we do ask for 2 references. We do want that one reference be a former teacher, either a professor or a former teacher at the high school level. So that's how we make our decisions in terms of the application and timeline. And by the way, we are almost done, and I'm finishing a little bit faster than I anticipated, but that's okay. There might be some questions. But our application will open every year in the early part of September. We usually try to lock in this September 1st date as when our application goes live. It is free to apply, by the way. We have a December 15th priority application deadline. And so this kind of gets into the numbers a little bit. As I mentioned, we're looking for about 400 students to accept into the program, and we typically will get anywhere between 1,900 and 2,000 applications into the program. And there's also a required interview that all scholars, if they are selected as a finalist, must complete. And not every applicant is granted an interview and granted a finalist status. So that's why this December 15th deadline becomes even more important. It does not lock a student into the program, but you want to think of this as sort of like an early action type of application decision. Whereas if a student applies to the program by December 15th, they are first priority in the review committee to be reviewed. And we will guarantee that their application will be reviewed by January 15th. So let me repeat that. It does not lock a student into the program, but it assures that student that if they apply and that their application is complete by December 15th, there's no waiting game. They will get a decision from us by January 15th. And after this deadline passes, then it becomes sort of like a rolling admission process where every week or so, we will send out another bulk of notifications on a rolling basis. All of our interviews are scheduled in the winter months and early spring throughout the month of January through April. The application will close in the early part of April, typically April 1st. And we send our final acceptances out in the early part of spring. We try our best to get our decisions out anywhere between late April through mid-May is when we release our decisions. Eligibility requirements for the purpose of this presentation: a student must be a college freshman or a sophomore, determined by the institution, as well as community college students are eligible for our program as well. U.S. citizen, but also documented students are eligible for our program. I do want to acknowledge that. And once again, we do a holistic application review process. Test scores are optional. How can you connect with us after this presentation? Well, the application will continue to be open until April 1st. A student can apply here. I will upload this presentation to the Transfer Summit portal if you would like to download that afterwards, but here's where a student can apply. You can refer a student to our program. So if you are working with a transfer student and you just want to nominate that student, you can do that here, and then the recruitment team will take over and contact that student directly with further information. We can also host virtual and in-person information sessions. So if you would like one of the recruitment team members to come out to your high school, your community college, or your four-year institution, we can certainly do that. Just put that request into our website and we can make sure that we can look at a date that works for both of us. And with that, that is it. I finished about 15 minutes earlier than I anticipated, but we have plenty of time for questions. To my moderator, how do we structure this? Do we take the participants off of mute? What's the structure?
Actually, either way. So if you have questions, you can type them in the chat below, or you can unmute yourself and ask. We actually do have someone who asked about the video, and if you have the time, is that something you could go back and play?
Yeah, let's go ahead. I think it's about a 3-minute video. And again, this video really unpacks our Scholar Institute program. As a reminder, that's the summer camp where our scholars come together and they are in the classroom teaching throughout the state of Illinois. So, wait a minute, why is that not working?
I know playing videos over Zoom, there's all sorts of things that have to be clicked in order for it to work.
Okay, I think I got it now.
Each summer, Golden Apple scholars attend our Summer Institutes, month-long intensive professional development, where they learn best practices from top experts in fields ranging from STEM to personalized learning, to trauma-informed practices, to teach in schools where they are needed the most.
So we have done a lot of LEAP training, CHAMPS training in terms of how to work with students and have classroom management and best practices in the classroom.
During Summer Institutes, students learn from LEAP Innovations, an expert partner that provides training in personalized learning and integration of technology into the classroom.
You've really seen a transformation of mindset. Teachers are now seen as learning scientists, Every child in our school system with this approach can actually have a personalized approach to their learning. Students will now be architects of their own learning, and learning will transcend beyond the traditional walls of a classroom. Children will be engaged on topics that are pertinent to them, that they're passionate about.
Through this professional development, scholars are becoming more versatile in their teaching practice. Summer institutes include real-world classroom experience, working directly with students.
You can learn about a lot of theories, you can learn about a lot in textbooks, but it's completely different when you're in a classroom.
But here, they were like, we want you teaching, we want you engaging with students.
By the time they start their professional careers, Golden Apple scholars will have earned hundreds of hours of classroom experience beyond state licensing requirements.
Boom, that's what I'm talking about.
We partner with highly credible experts at Lurie Children's Hospital to prepare and recognize the signs and effects of childhood trauma, taught by experts from Lurie Children's Hospital.
Talking about creating safe environments, right? Developing healthy relationships.
The vast majority of mental health needs that kids have get met in schools as opposed to outside of schools. We talk about a trauma lens. The notion of asking the question, what happened to you, as opposed to what did you do? That creates a space to learn more about a youngster's experiences and the impact on what they're doing in school.
And they talk to us about like why so many students are misdiagnosed and are labeled inappropriately because we are so quick to kind of jump to a conclusion.
These trainings will help them avoid a lot of the situations that I had to face my first year without adequate training. Even experienced teachers who have been in the classrooms for years have not received this type of training.
My apologies. I actually think I grabbed the shortened video that's actually clipped a little bit, but hopefully that helps. So again, to explain that program a little bit, it's called Scholar Institute, sometimes referred to as Summer Institute. It's a requirement every single summer of our scholars, where we take them at universities throughout the state of Illinois. They stay at a university partner for 3 to 4 weeks. And their week sort of looks like maybe from 9 to 12, they're in the classroom co-teaching summer school at a district near that university. And then in the afternoon from 1 to 4, they're in a classroom with experienced teachers talking about some of the concepts. So talking about the classroom management, trauma-informed care, cultural competency. So you kind of want to think about it as every single summer, a scholar is gaining direct classroom teaching experience, but also indirect classroom experience where they're kind of talking about some of the concepts, theories, so on and so forth. And we also pay scholars for that program. Every single summer, a scholar is paid $2,000. It goes directly into their banking account, and they use that money for whatever they want.
Thanks, Iggy. We have a couple questions that have come through. Ellen asks, community college students who graduate with their associate's degree get a total of $10,000 for tuition and $4,000 for the Summer Institute. So in total, it'd be $14,000, correct?
That's the amount. It could go a little bit higher because maybe depending on the number of scholar institutes they can go through, maybe that amount could go up to $16,000. But at minimum, yes, minimum $14,000. One thing I do want to share though is because we work with universities and the financial aid office, we never want our amount, this would be rare, but we never want our tuition assistance amount to exceed the cost of tuition. So if a transfer student has already earned an amount that's covering all of room and board, all of tuition, we don't want our assistance to come in the amount of a refund. But when I think about transfer students and maybe that institutional scholarship being a little bit lower, I would think that would be very rare that we would need to lower our amount because the bill is already paid for at the university. But just remember that we don't want our amount to exceed the cost of tuition where a refund is given to the student. I hope that makes sense.
That makes sense to me. Nicole, I see she has her hand up, but I also see the questions in the chat. So Nicole, did you want to ask them out loud?
Yeah, sure. So my question was, I guess, so I'm just going to add color to it. At Governor State University, freshmen, sophomore students are undeclared. They do not declare their major until their junior year. So I just want to make sure that students aren't missing out on an opportunity because they are considered undeclared. So I just want to confirm, can they apply for this even though they are undeclared?
Yes, they can. We actually go through a verification process where upon acceptance, we send out our acceptances. That scholar will then, or that newly inducted scholar will need to provide documentation that verifies their enrollment, verifies their next semester schedule. So we can determine as that student is starting their next semester of courses that they are on a pathway to a major in education.
And I noticed when you showed the video, I felt like it was maybe not necessarily, but geared a lot towards elementary education topics. Can secondary education students receive this?
That is a very good question. I thank you for calling that out. When we think about what are we looking for, okay? Because it is a selective program, you know, make no mistake about that. It's a selective program. And I did mention that freshmen and sophomore standing students do get a priority because they tend to retain in our program at a higher level. But right now there is a growing number of unfilled teaching positions. We've probably already heard it, the term teacher shortage in the state of Illinois. It's approaching, I believe, 2,000 unfilled teaching positions right now in this calendar year. So when we're thinking about what are we looking for, we have to respond to the positions that are most in need. And so when we're making our selections, we also are prioritizing areas like early childhood education, bilingual education, special education, STEM-based fields, physical education. So when we're making our selections and everything, no, we do not want all of our scholars in one scholar class being 70% interested in in elementary education. So that is a part of our selection process. Thank you for calling that out. Other things that we're looking for, we don't want all of our scholars coming from the same geographic area. So when we're looking at our selections, we're making sure that our scholars are spread out throughout the state of Illinois. But I do want to state that there is not a limit on the number of scholars we will accept from a certain institution. There's no limit on that, but we do want to make sure that our scholars are spread out geographically.
And I had one last thing I just wanted to kind of bring up when you talked about, I know people in financial aid will understand where I'm coming from with this, but you know, there's a difference between cost and tuition, right, and cost of attendance. But I think you mentioned you guys try not to go over cost of tuition, which would be different. And I wanted to encourage maybe your organization to reevaluate that. I don't know if there would be a different metric involved, but I advise a large portion, pretty much all the secondary education students at Governor State University, and a good portion of students are hesitant to commit to the program because they're working full time. They're trying to manage doing observation hours plus their schoolwork, and they're petrified of the thought, how are they going to balance supporting their family and full-time student teaching? So it's a balancing act. So I'm just wondering, you know, if that could be taken into consideration. I always advocate for this, especially in that final year of student teaching.
I understand your question, and I do fully understand the concern. But one thing I do have to share is the tuition assistance that we are providing a scholar doesn't always come solely from Golden Apple. Some of that money comes from the state of Illinois, supported also through ISAC. So there are programmatic requirements that we have simply just by Golden Apple, but there's also ISAC programmatic requirements that we have to abide by. So as we evaluate that, it could be something that is legislated at the state level. But I can bring that up to our senior leadership, but I just want to make sure that I explain why that is for right now.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'll pause here to see if we have any more who would like to ask a question out loud before we conclude the session.
I have a question. Ziggy, how early is too early to contact you at from a high school counselor perspective for a student that if I am meeting with a student sophomore, junior year that know they want to go into teaching and this could be an opportunity for them, is that too early for them to be contacting you and meeting with you? Would you rather just them, follow the process senior year?
No, I actually, we're trying to shift out of that. In the past, we've really strategized our recruitment efforts primarily to seniors in high school. That would be the earliest. But, as we think about, teaching, we need to start sparking that interest in teaching much earlier. And so, sophomores who are still maybe in that exploration stage where maybe they're thinking about teaching, but maybe not locked in. That's a time for us to meet, to talk about the rewards of teaching and what comes with teaching. And I also want to share that sometimes for anyone also in the room that an interest in teaching may not always come in the form of a student saying, I want to be in the classroom teaching, but it could also come in the form of a student having conversations with you about social justice, community activism, community support. When you haven't seen those conversations come up, that could also be supported as a teacher and connected to a teacher. And so keep that in mind. But although a student can't apply until they're as early as a senior, it is not too early for us to have a conversation with that student as early as sophomore year.
Thank you. I'll send them your way.
Great. Thanks, April.
Hi, Dean, I see your hand up.
Hi, Samantha. Ziggy, thanks for a great presentation on this program. I'm just curious, because we do hear a lot about the teacher shortage, which, by the way, I'm probably the only one on this call, but I was blown away when you said there's a school of need in literally every single county in Illinois. That somehow that just really impacted me. I'd never heard it put that way before. And we tend to think of schools of need as being, sort of clustered in certain areas. And obviously that's not the case. And there's a lot that we always hear about, moves that are being made by the state to try to address the teacher shortage. And I wondered if there's ever a time when programs like Golden Apple and like Call Me Mr. to increase the number of male students, particularly diverse students who are male. I wonder if there's ever a time when you guys sort of come together and put your heads together and really try to figure out how to impact that teacher shortage.
That is a very good question. And actually we have a partnership with Call Me Mr. So we have 2 recruitment partnerships that advances a student to the finalist stage simply by completing the application. So we have a partnership with the UIC Call Me Mr. program that if a Mr. applies to the Golden Apple Scholars Program, completes the application, they are automatically advanced to the interview stage. The reason why we do that is because we are confident in the support that that student is getting through the Call Me Mr. program. They already have a demonstrated interest in teaching, and they are getting connected to that very early. Then also, there's the growing need of males of color interested in teaching. We already know that. So we formed a partnership with Call Me Mr. They go straight to the finalist stage. The other partnership that we have is with the CEPI program. This might be a little bit unfamiliar with this audience, but CEPI is, if I'm getting the term right, it is Scaling Educational Pathways in Illinois. Pretty much
It's the ability of for a student in the high school level, I believe it's primarily high school, where they can get an endorsement in education. They can take courses either within their high school or with the local community college related to education. And when they graduate, they'll have an endorsement on their transcript that says they have an endorsement in education. Those students, CEPI students, are also advanced to the finalist stage simply by completing the application. And the reason why we do that is having spoken with the leadership of CEPI, when we found out the number of hours a CEPI student is completing directly related to education and also getting work experience. They sort of have a work study experience embedded into their program. When we think about all of that, that's confidence enough that that student deserves an interview, no matter their GPA.
Great.
So they advance to the final stage as well.
And one last quick question. I know we're probably at time, but what if it takes the student, especially a transfer student, if they get out of sync with the progression of coursework? Often it can take them a 5th year to complete, a bachelor's degree. What does the support from Golden Apple look like if it takes a student longer than is typical to complete?
Yeah, every single semester we do, or quarter, depending on that calendar system. But we do a transfer collection process. So we'll just say semesters. At the end of every single semester, all of our scholars are required to submit their transcripts so we can evaluate their academic progress and their anticipated graduation year. And every single month, we have a meeting called Scholar Status Meeting. Whenever we notice that a scholar is falling off of their anticipated graduation year, or there's a dip in academic progress, as a director and a senior leadership, we will talk about that candidate along with what that student has disclosed to us to find out what type of support do we need to put in place so this doesn't turn into something more of a concern.
Great, thank you so much.
I am looking at the time now, and I want to thank you so much, Ziggy, for this really important and informative conversation about how Golden Apple can work with our transfer student population. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A reminder for everyone in the room here, ISBE virtual event evaluation, that link is in the chat. Please use that to complete and get your PD hours. We have one more session today. We hope you all can join us for the 3rd session that begins at 4, which is more informal transfer conversations. We hope to see you there, and thanks again, Ziggy. Bye-bye.